It's super early on Saturday there, isn't it?
No, it's 8 a.m. This is a late start for us.
Oh, that's late. What time do you usually get up?
Normally go for a swim at 6.
Yeah, I'm probably caught at 5. I love my mornings.
Jesus.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's
Are you serious?
Welcome back to What You Will Learn. My name is Adam Ashton.
and my name is Adam Jones. We just interviewed Neil Pasricha, the author of The Happiness Equation.
He's also the author of the book of Awesome, which I believe spent 150 weeks on the bestseller list, which is absolutely massive. It goes without saying. And it's based on his blog, super popular blog, 1000awesomethings.com.
Neil is a happy, awesome dude. So there is a lot we can learn from Neil. Happiness is a good goal that a lot of us don't have. So it's something we can learn from Big Neil. Started off with death, crept toward happiness, and there's a lot everyone can learn from this interview.
More recently, Neil has created a newish podcast in mid-2018 called 3 Books. And what he does is he interviews awesome book people, be that authors or publishers or librarians or maybe one day podcast hosts, to talk about their 3 most formative books, the 3 books that had the biggest impact in shaping their lives. So there was some great synergies between Neil's show and our show, and we love speaking to Neil, not only about happiness stuff, but also more broadly about books in general and the impact that books have had on his life and some of his favorite and most formative books. Hope you enjoy this chat with Neil Pasricha. Here is Neil.
So we like to start the classic story, which what most people in general population have. You know, you go to work, you have holidays, you get married, you get a mortgage, you have some fun, and then sooner or later we degenerate and we cark it, we die. And one of your quotes in your book, the Book of Awesome quote, it says, "Life is so great that we only get a tiny moment to enjoy everything we see, and that moment is right now. And that moment is counting down, and that moment is always fleeting. You'll never be as young as you are right now." So I'd like to start with just what do you think the cost of this willful ignorance is that we have, where we just shut our minds to the idea of our time counting down?
And yeah, I mean, it's a huge cost. I am so in favor of embracing death as a conversation, and I wonder partly if it's because of my East Indian heritage. You know, my dad, ever so blunt, would be like, "Well, that guy's dead." You know, like as a child, he never couched death in the form that we do in the West, which is using even phrases like "we lost him." We lost who? Where'd he go? You know, my dad was always like, "That guy got killed. That guy died." He was more surrounded by death at a young age. His mother died when he was 3. He was from a village where they didn't even keep track of birthdays. I won't say poverty, but certainly a poor family in India in the 1940s. So death was just part of him, like as a conversation topic. So I've adopted that mentality. It's maybe become a tad more, I won't say philosophical, but you quoted, I think, from my TED Talk, or maybe from the Happiness Equation. But I do think of it all the time. And the most recent thing I've been thinking about, which is related directly to this question, is I am now obsessed with the number 1,000. Okay, like it just sort of came to me the other day. I'm like, well, if you're only alive 30,000 days, well then how many days are in a month? Like 30, right? So I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, oh crap. I'm only alive for 1,000 months, right? Like a lifespan is 1,000 months long. It's so interesting. Every month that passes, which they pass by so fast, right? You only have 1,000 of those total. That's your total life. And then just to even make it a little bit more micro, I like to kind of think of it this way too, is the average person is awake, unless you're you guys because you get up early, but the average person is awake for 1,000 minutes a day. Just as that. So everyone is about awake for 1,000 minutes a day. If you want to do the math, it's 16 and 2/3 hours. I'm still giving you 7 and a bit hours to sleep, but you're awake for about 1,000 minutes a day. So much of my work and my thinking and my books and all that stuff is related to this eternal question of how do you best spend your minutes? How do you best spend your months? How do you best live the most fulsome, intentional, rich, purposeful life full of meaning that you possibly can? And I hope, I mean, at least I'm trying to find it for myself, and I hope by sharing with other people, it can help them too.
Amazing. And you had your blog was 1,000 Awesome Things. Your podcast, 3 books, we'll talk about later. You're heading towards 1,000 books. It's all coming together, this number 1,000.
I know. And, I think I like that number so much because it sounds wildly ambitious when you talk about me writing 1,000 awesome things on a blog, but yet it is strangely surmountable. So it's both wildly ambitious and strangely surmountable, because you could go for 1,000 runs. You could make 1,000 homemade dinners. You could play with your kids 1,000 times. It'll take a while, but you could do it. And that's why the number 1,000 is better than the number 100 or the number 1,000,000, because it's both challenging and achievable.
I like it a lot. We started the podcast was basically a lot about business books, and we very quickly then veered a little off track and started reading some other things. So a lot of Stoic philosophy and a lot of Buddhism, which kept talking about realizing our own impermanence, or even meditating on our own mortality. And so, as you say, that we've got this limited time, 1,000 months perhaps, and we need to try and make the most of it. One thing I had on my phone was called Days of Life, where every day would give me a notification saying you've got 20,371 days left to live. Unfortunately, the newest
you're so young.
The newest iPhone update actually they didn't update the app, so it's gone. I can't access it anymore. But what do you think that's like a good idea to realize? Because I don't think many people are always thinking, I've only got 1,000 months, or I've only got 20,000 days left, or whatever it is. Do you think having that constant reminder is a good thing?
Well, I think it's certainly worth talking about. Kevin Kelly, founder of Wired Magazine, is famous for having a death clock. And for those listening that are interested, you can literally type in death clock as a Chrome plugin, and it will insert. I use the Momentum plugin, right? But there's a death clock plugin, and you type it in, and sure enough, you type in your age, and it looks very much like Momentum, like a beautiful image that comes over every new browser you open, and it says you have, 11,462 days, 10 hours, 48 minutes, and 6 seconds left to live. And, when Kevin Kelly said that, I remember him saying that. I think it was on an episode of the Tim Ferriss show back in kind of 2 or 3 years ago. I remember thinking to myself, how macabre, like how kind of grotesque is that? Like how disgusting is that to be so obsessed with death that you're literally reminded of it dozens of times a day. But at the same time, I like the takeaway, which is it forces you to be highly curative. Curative, is that the right word? I don't know. I don't even know how to say this, but you're selecting what you do way more seriously, right? Because I think there's a downside. You could overdo it. You could be like, this lunch has to be the best sandwich ever. Like this I can only have al dente noodles. Throw these in the trash, because I want it to be perfect. But there is something to that. I think it helps, to answer your question, get you from A to B. I just don't think going from B to C is necessarily valuable. So going from a place of complacency to a place of intentionality is good. Going from a place of intentionality to a place of obsessiveness is bad.
Yeah, I think I definitely overdid it once. I was on this meditation app, and it had this meditation on impermanence. And the first 30 seconds it says, only do this if you've got 10 years meditation experience in caves and hardcore, which I definitely don't have. Anyway, I did it anyway because I was curious to see what happened. And it was a 7-phase meditation where you walk through the jungle, you see your body there lying on the ground, and then it slowly decomposes. Infested by maggots, vultures get into it, and all that. So you really,
oh my goodness,
by the end of it, you really realize that it is impermanent. But I think that was a little bit too far, because it kind of really put a knife through my brain.
Did that affect you in any way over the short, medium, or long term?
I think it was probably a little bit too far for me. I think it's very real. It's ultra real when you're looking at it in those terms of your own body decomposing there. So it's almost too powerful. On a spectrum, I think meditating on death to a small degree can be very healthy, but in this case, I don't think I was ready for the power of it. For the next few weeks, every time I close my eyes, I visualize a vulture attacking my body. So,
can I also just ask a really bizarre technical question, which is like, did you upload like a 3D photo of yourself? Like, how did it even get a picture of you in there?
No, so it's all a visualization. It's a visualization meditation.
Okay. Okay. So you were picturing what you had previously pictured in your brain, as opposed to like you update some you upload some avatar and it shows. That's what I'm picturing.
Seriously next level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, that's intense though. That is really interesting. I am. You made me super curious and like trying it, but also scared of trying it.
Absolutely.
I like it to go
get away from death.
Complete, a complete. I can't even segue from this. It's just going to be a complete jump. One thing I think is super important. I like your 4 S's framework for a good job. So if we're thinking we've only got a certain amount of time in life, we need to obviously make the most of that. And obviously within our time, a big part of that is going to be work. So can you tell us your ideas around work and the best, like what's a good job and why?
Well, yeah, absolutely. First thing I think of is you should never not work. Okay, like so that's the first thing. People are listening, they're just like, oh, I don't really like work, or I have to do it, blah blah. I'm like, no, I take the opposite approach. I actually say never retire. You guys where you live are a lot closer to that famous Okinawa story. They have the word ikigai, which means the reason they get up in the morning, and they do not have a word for retirement. And they live about 7 years longer than we do. So turns out in the Western world, this entirely fake concept of retirement was invented in Germany in 1889, and some dude in charge named Otto von Bismarck, like the guy who drove the bus in The Simpsons, like Otto. He's like, yeah, youth unemployment 20-30%. Old people, they die at 67. That's the average age, So he's like 65. We'll make that the number. And if you're old and you want to leave, you don't have to. But if you want to, we'll give you some cash. Okay. And everyone's like, what a great, interesting idea. The United States copied it. Canada copied it. UK copied it. I don't know about Australia. You haven't told me. The point is, it's like 65 is an arbitrary number. It bears no proximity to anything anymore. You live way longer than that. So I say, to your point of why is work so important, because it gives you what I call the 4 S's. They all start with the letter S. Okay. First one is social. I'm working right now, although it sounds like I'm just having fun, which I am. I'm totally working, right? Like we're talking. This is a podcast. I do a bunch of these all the time. I'm working and I love it. It gives me a social connection with people like you, people I would not have normally met. So I get social fulfillment. Same as like having a best friend to eat within the cafeteria. Okay. Number 2, stimulation. Always learning something new. Again, I would never have thought about this death visualization of decaying in the forest had I not talked to you. So I learned something new today. And like my day is like, for work today, I went to a Jeffersonian lunch, like a lunch with 12 people who didn't know each other, following a guided conversation where we do not share our background, but we talk about themes and issues that we're thinking about. Fascinating thing I did at lunch today. But like, again, stimulation, something I'm learning. Third one is structure, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And the last one is story, being part of something bigger than yourself. So if I'm indeed passionate about helping people live happy lives, and that is what all my books and my podcasts are ultimately about, then I could not do that if I wasn't working, right? Like I couldn't do that at home or on the golf course. I would have to actually be helping others in order to be part of that. So just to zoom out again, it's work is vital to our happiness. We should never retire. We should always be working. I don't care about the S of salary, but I do care about the other 4, which are social, structure, stimulation, and story.
Yeah, sick. I really love that. And you write a lot about happiness and how we can attain more happiness. With happiness, sometimes I feel like if I went to a bar on a Tuesday night and had 13 beers and was dancing all night, that's a really happy night, but it really sacrifices the work component where you get meaning. So what are your thoughts between this balance of happiness and meaning, or are they the same thing, or are they different things?
Happiness and what did you say? Meaning, like
like MEAN.
Oh, meaning.
Yeah,
sorry,
the Aussie accent.
That's my Canadian accent. So no, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Well, first thing I'd say is try marijuana. Uh, less hangovers. Okay, no, but Canada, as you probably know, just legal was the second major country in the world to just legalize marijuana this year. So suddenly it's cool to talk about up here because it's totally legal. But anyway, by the way, you'll never guess the first country. Do you want to guess? Because I noticed the United States was always saying that, sorry, the New York Times was always saying Canada became the first major country, and I was like, first major country? What? Who was the other country? So I again, if you're from Uruguay, I apologize. The New York Times does not consider you a major country. Although congrats on your progressive drug policy. And so here's the thing. The definition of happiness that I love is the joy you feel while striving towards your potential. Okay. Does going out and having 13 drinks give you some fleeting pleasure? Of course. And that's great. And we shouldn't live lives that are so obsessed with not doing that. Like, it's okay to have 2 pieces of cheesecake. It's okay to go to a party. It's good to live, right? But let's remember the definition. The joy you feel while striving towards your potential. What I'm trying to say is sometimes pain gives us more happiness than pleasure. So, training for a marathon, when it's raining, when you've got shin splints, when you are a little bit unsure why you're doing this, but then you ultimately achieve this massive goal. Building a deck in your backyard. It's hot, it's sunny, you're sweating, your partner brings you some lemonade at lunch. At the end, though, you have a deck that you built with your bare hands with a couple friends that you get to live on for 30 years. See, this is the point. Pleasure does not always lead to happiness. Happiness, similarly, does not always mean having pleasure. The bar that you shared is pleasure without maybe some long-term happiness, although I'm fine with your happiness in the short term. Great, you should do it. It's just that happiness, as we define it, does not always include short-term pleasure. So we have to sometimes think about the striving part as things that do make us happy deep down.
I love it. As we sort of now transition towards talking about books more broadly, I just wanted to transition and say that your projects always seem to be massive. We talked about the number 1,000 before, and that an early project was the blog 1,000 Awesome Things, which is a thing every day. That's 4 years, and now your podcast, 3 books. You're doing 1,000 books every couple of weeks. You're doing 3 of them, so it's going to take like 13 and a bit years, I believe, to get to the end. But you're setting yourself these massive journeys, I guess. All these projects you're taking on are multi-year and almost over a decade long.
Yeah. You forgot the "you're crazy" part at the end of that. Okay, yeah. So I think what you're saying is why? Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah. Okay, right. So here's the thing. When I started 1,000 Awesome Things, so just as a 10-second backgrounder, for those that don't know it, which I assume is most people, because most people don't know anything in the world. Even the most famous person in the world is not known by 99% of people in the world. So I started a blog in 2008. Why? Well, my wife left me, and my best friend took his own life, and those 2 totally devastating, heartbreaking things happened in a span of a few days. Okay, I decided to blog every single night about one thing to cheer myself up, like flipping to the cold side of the pillow, like peeling an orange in one big peel, like waking up and realizing it's Saturday, finally peeing after holding it forever.
Oh yeah,
and
awesome.
Right, exactly. And why did I call it 1000awesomethings.com? Because honestly, without having the deep philosophical bent around the word 1,000 like I do today, at that time I just thought 1,000 was a small number. I was like, you read the paper, it's billions of dollars this, millions of people that, like 1,000 is tiny. So it wasn't until I started doing it every single weekday, writing an essay, editing it, posting it, getting pictures for it, that I realized, oh man, this is going to take me 4 years to write if I do one every single, so it's like a 4-year commitment. I didn't realize that. But to my earlier point, oftentimes that pain led to a greater happiness. I achieved the goal. I couldn't believe I did it. I got 3 book deals like right from that blog. My first 3 books, the Book of Awesome, the Book of Even More Awesome, the Book of Holiday Awesome, are essentially just printouts of that book, like of that blog, and stapled together, And so I got 3 book deals from it. I'm invited to speak at TEDs and for like the because of that, I'm speaking for like the royal families in the Middle East, and I'm speaking for big corporations, and all that stuff, guys, came from deciding to write 1,000 awesome things with no ads, no sponsors, no promotions, for me, for selfish reasons, to feel better as I was going through challenge. So what I'm doing now with 3 books, my podcast, and again, it's you're right, it's 1,000 books, but every show we uncover 3 of them. So we're doing 333 chapters, and 3 books are discussed on each show. So the show's called 3 Books. Similarly, I've decided I'd like to read the 1,000 most formative books in the world. Okay. And to do that, there's no algorithm. So I have to ask 333 people which 3 books are most formative to them. You mentioned it casually. I'm publishing on the lunar calendar, which means that it works out to almost every 2 weeks, although it turns out that you should never do that because the Apple algorithm really hates you for it when you start publishing at Tuesday at 3 in the morning and then the following Friday at 7 p.m. But I'm doing that because I desperately, selfishly want to know what those books are. I desperately, selfishly want to read them. And I desperately, selfishly want to have a total fun project that makes no money, has no ads, is purely beauty and art for myself, so that I can look back on my deathbed and be like, I had fun doing it. And I also believe deep down in my gut, if you ask me honestly, that I think good karma will come from that. And this conversation that we're having right now is an example of that. I would not have met you if it wasn't for that books podcast, and we developed this shared connection. We meet other crazy, weird, fun, interesting book people. And I wouldn't have found you guys, and vice versa, if it wasn't for my podcast. So this is karma. It's putting something beautiful into the world and letting the world come back and tell you what it thinks.
Yeah. Right back at you, man. Absolutely. So you've had a really cool journey since you had that, I guess, lows in your life, which you mentioned. How have books really helped you on your journey from that stage of the lows to the, I guess it seems like you've, having a great time now, like you were saying?
Yeah, first of all, I don't want to be trite and sort of say anything like I wasn't happy then and I am happy now. Like, I don't want to come across that simplistic. That's not true. Of course, in the past, I had moments of happiness, and at times now I have moments of sadness, etc. Life is a practice. Happiness is a journey. It's not a destination, So I don't want to pretend that it's like I snap my fingers and everything's good. So we get that out of the way. Then books. Okay. Oh my gosh. How much time do we have? Okay, no, I'll do a quick version. Here's what happened. I went on a honeymoon. So to close off the story, like I was, desperately single, living downtown in a bachelor apartment for years. And over those years, they clicked by, and eventually I worked up the courage to online date. And a year after that, I met someone. And a year after that, we moved in together. And a year after that, we got married. So flash forward to today, and I'm married to a beautiful woman named Leslie, who's a teacher here in Toronto in the Toronto District School Board. And we have been lucky enough that we were able to go on a honeymoon for 3 weeks. Okay, this is the longest vacation I think I ever went on, and we went to the other side of the world, closer to you, Southeast Asia, and we loved it. And you know what? I went on my first ever news fast. I mean, occasionally I'd get up in the morning at the resort or whatever, there'd be like some lame photocopied New York Times, and I'd be like, "Oh, is this the newspaper?" And I'd be like, "Oh, there's no back on there's no crossword puzzle." I'm like, "This isn't really a newspaper." I didn't really read it. But my point is, when I got home from that 3-week vacation, and by the way, I should tell you, she told me she was pregnant on the flight home. Like, she bought the pregnancy test in the Kuala Lumpur airport, did the pregnancy test in the airplane bathroom, told me she was pregnant on the plane, and the happiness equation, my most recent book, is actually the letter I wrote to my unborn son after she told me she was pregnant. Okay, so that's a separate story. But you asked about books. I get home to Toronto. I drive to work the next day. I turn on the morning news radio. And honestly, guys, it felt like someone was shattering glass in my ears. Like it felt overwhelming. The violence, the fires, the sexual abuses, the terrorism, the wars. I couldn't handle it. It was like I was coming out of a meditative retreat in the forest and I was suddenly being blasted with heavy metal or something, right? It just felt harsh. So I turned off the radio, and for a couple minutes I sat in my car driving to work feeling anxiety over being silent. And then after a couple minutes of feeling anxious for being quiet, I had an idea. So I clicked the record button on my iPhone app for audio recording, and I said, "This is Neil. I'm talking to myself, but here's my idea for an article or for a blog post or whatever." And then a few minutes later, I had another one. And by the time I got to work, I had 10. I had like 10 ideas on my phone, and I thought, that's really funny. I eliminated the news, and I had ideas. The ideas made me want to read books and pick up books I hadn't read in years. Like I'd been reading 5 books a year, nothing, and on a vacation maybe. And then that year I read 50 books. I canceled my magazine subscriptions. I canceled my newspaper subscriptions. I had 5 magazines, 2 newspapers. I had 7 things I was getting pushed to me, and I became a puller. I moved from a pusher to a puller. I went to the bookstore. I wandered. I got something that caught my eye. I did the first 5 pages test. If the voice gripped me, I bought it. And that year I read 50 books from a couple small systematic changes. I then, on a plane ride, was feeling so happy about being a great husband and a great son and a great brother, and you could tell that this was coming from books. So I whipped out an article called 8 Ways to Read a Lot More Books, and on a lark, I submitted it to Harvard Business Review. Well, wouldn't you believe it? They printed the article, and in 2017, it became, if not then one of the most popular articles on the entire website for the entire year. Like it was the most popular article for like 6 months straight on Harvard Business Review or HBR.org. And the title of the article was just 8 Ways to Read More Books. So then I realized, everyone wants to read more. It's not just me. The reason the article is popular, if you type how to read more into Google, like it's the first or second hit, like everyone wants to read more. So, and my advice was like, put a bookshelf at your front door, cancel TV, put the TV in the basement, like tell everyone what you're reading, like, so you have to broadcast it. Like it was basic stuff, but it was enough that it made me realize that there's something bigger here happening to me and that the world desperately needs, which is deep, thoughtful, long-form content in the best form of compressed knowledge we have ever invented, which is called a book. And so now I started my 3 books podcast. I'm on this journey to read 1,000 formative books. I'm reading my own books on top of that. I've started a book newsletter. I've got like 35,000 people a month get a list of just the books I read every month. And I copied that idea from Ryan Holiday, who I think you guys have had on the show, if I'm wrong, or if I'm right wrong. Or,
maybe soon.
Not yet. Okay.
Hopefully.
Well, maybe I can put you guys in touch.
Love to.
Yeah. I mean, he did this. He is like way more people on his email list. But I emailed him. I was like, Ryan, can I copy your idea? He's like, go ahead. So I just like literally copied his idea. And now I have a books email. I have a books podcast. I'm talking to people like you, book lovers, book junkies. I feel like, and I've installed another bookshelf at my front door. I have canceled cable. I've moved the TV to the basement. I've organized my books in the Dewey Decimal System. And I gotta tell you, I feel like and Leslie and I have had kids. I feel like the best father, the best son, the best brother, the best person I can possibly be. And I know I can feel it. It's coming from what I'm reading.
Fantastic. I definitely echo all of those sentiments. I'm just about to fill up my second bookshelf, so I need to get a new one as well. We've got a couple of devil's advocate questions about books, but we'll save that for a bit later while we're riding this positive high of books. Your podcast is where you have someone awesome on to talk about their 3 most formative books. Personal favorite of mine was the Seth Godin episode, if anyone's looking to get started. And we want to put you on the spot here, and we normally ask this as sort of the last question, but what are perhaps your 3 most formative books, or 3 of your favorite books at the moment that we can talk about?
Okay. Well, do you want to go formative or favorite?
Formative, or
because there's some. It's a Venn diagram, but they don't overlap completely. Do you know what I mean?
Hit us with formative, so it's more of a 3 books format.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, I'm going to give you some But I am also hoping to do an episode of my own show as I do it, because I'm trying to think about them. So, okay, here's one. It's called Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Louis Sacher, Sacher. It's a children's book. I read it when I was maybe in 4th grade. It's absurdist comedy packaged as a children's book. So a 30 classroom school was accidentally built on top of each other instead of beside each other. Every chapter is one of the students, of the school. So there's 30 chapters, 30 students. One day they turn the teacher into an animal by accident. A kid can't do math but ends up getting all the questions right on the test, and the other kid gets crazy. So it's absurdist comedy packaged into a children's book, and I never ever encountered anything like that before. I was like, you can be funny, like you can make jokes that are just so outlandish that they're funny. And I tell you that because from probably the age of grade 4 or 9 years old to probably the age of 23, so I want to say something like 10-15 years of my life, I wanted to be a professional comedy writer, probably because of that book. I went to university where there was a comedy newspaper. I became the editor of that newspaper. I worked 40 hours a week there. I went to New York City. I wrote with Simpsons and Saturday Night Live writers. I wanted to be a comedy writer, and that book was what triggered that desire inside me.
Fantastic. That's a great
now
one.
I write books that aren't funny.
Man, I saw your TED talk. You do have that comic in you. We did stand-up comedy at the start of this year. Start of this year, and it's so bloody hard. It's unbelievable. But you've got this natural, awesome humor that it's not like you're doing explicitly trying to be funny. It's just very funny the way you talk. It's like really good.
As the Michael Cera character at the end of the movie Juno said, I'm actually trying really hard.
Love it. I like it. Fantastic. Well, that was a real left fielder. Actually, maybe that was a good formative one. Maybe we'll ask you about your favorite books at the very end, as we usually do. But we got a couple of a bit of a devil's advocate question.
Good. I love this stuff. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Don't hold back.
So one of my favorite books I've ever read recently was Black Swan. And
I was gonna say that.
Oh wow, man! That
keep going.
That hit me for 6. But in the book, Nassim talks about this idea of Umberto's library, and when we read, we might fall under the illusion that we know a lot. The more books we read, we might start believing we know a lot. But the idea of Umberto's library is to always have more books that you haven't read. So your library of books. Unread books is bigger than your read books, just to remind us how we know really jack shit in the world and we don't get too confident with what we understand.
What do you think about that? The more that we learn, as you said, you had all these feelings of becoming better, but it seems like the more you learn, the more you realize what you don't know. So can you hit us with some of your thoughts on books and to why maybe this false or perceived feeling of knowledge might not be the best?
Yeah, totally. So the more you know, the less you know. So, that's the sentence I'm thinking of it. The more you know, the more you realize, or the more you know, that the less you know, right? Because the world appears to be so much bigger than you actually thought it was. You go from the unconsciously incompetent stage to the consciously incompetent stage. It's like learning how to drive. Have you heard this model before? So first you don't know that you can drive. And then you get in a car and you try and you realize you suck at it. So you go from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. Then you go to consciously competent. You realize you can drive and you're okay. And then you go to unconsciously competent at the end. Right? At the end, you arrive home in your driveway after your work and you're like, how did I get here? Like I must have driven here, because you're unconsciously competent. Those are the 4 phases. So what you're pointing out is it's healthy to go from phase 1 to 2, which is unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent, right? So I interviewed Tim Urban for 3 books, and I don't know if you know him. He writes a very popular blog called waitbutwhy.com.
Yes.
And he said to me in that interview, which I don't think I've even released it yet, but I should. It's just because the lunar count. I'm just waiting for the damn moon to turn. he said to me, the fact that I've realized that I can't read every book in the world released me from the stressful obligation of even trying.
Ooh.
Okay. And it was something along those lines. And I was like, what a beautiful metaphor for life. If you understand that it's greater in complexity than you can possibly understand, which is what the Umberto's Eco library is, then actually that's quite relieving. Because now you feel like a snowflake in the universe. You feel like a little part of the pale blue dot. You feel like you're here for an infinitesimally short amount of time. You feel like you were dead for, as Mark Twain says, I was dead. Being dead will never hurt me. I was already dead for millions of years, and I didn't seem to mind that at all. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like that. Point is, if you realize that you're so small and tiny and no one cares and no one listens and no one notices you, and there's a David Foster Wallace quote about this as well, which is you'll stop caring what people think about you when you realize that they seldom do.
Mm.
And I find that thought that we're talking about to be incredibly liberating. I do not find it to be incredibly, as some people do, stultifying, if that's the right word, or suffocating, or nothing I do matters. I find it to be incredibly liberating. I love the fact that in the Seinfeld writer's room, Jerry Seinfeld put up a huge poster of a Hubble telescope photo of sort of the endless cosmos. And he did that to make them feel less stressed. He's like, nothing we do matters, we're just a blip in the universe. And I've heard Judd Apatow say, famous comedy movie director and producer. He did Knocked Up and movies like that. He says, and he's got a great book called Sick in the Head. He says, I find that suffocating. I find that very limiting artistically. Well, I agree with Seinfeld. I think it's artistically liberating because if nothing you do matters, then you can do whatever you want. If nothing you do matters, then you come up with B movie after Seinfeld, and then you do comedians in cars getting coffee. You have hit bomb, hit bomb, hit bomb. Fine.
Man, B movie is great. I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to trash your favorite movie. But my point is, it's if nothing you do ultimately matters, then you are free. You are free. You can make up a crazy, weird podcast like you and I are, we are doing together, and just put it out there. You can, as Seth Godin would say, you can be a big fan of poof, right? Which is the idea that if it doesn't work, you move on to the next thing. You just keep going, and that's liberating. So I love the book Black Swan. I agree with the thought, and I'm reading the 1,000 Most Formative Books for fun, not because I think I'll then know everything.
Love it. Fantastic. Neil, it's been a great convo as we now move to our usual wrap-up episodes. What are your favorite books or some books you can recommend that you think people should read?
Well, I'm not sure if you've heard of this one, but there's a book called The Black Swan.
It's actually not in our... We haven't recorded... We've read it. We're going to record an episode on it soon. It's a phenomenal book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned it, so it seems hilarious to mention it again, but it was life-changing for me. I really did change how I thought about life. I went from putting all my chips on one number and spinning the roulette wheel to putting a chip on every number and spinning the roulette wheel and deciding that, yes, I'll have my full-time job at Walmart, and I'll start my blog, and I'll do some speaking, and I'll start a podcast. It's just I wanted more legs on my table. I wanted more side hustles. I wanted more chips on more numbers, and I got that from the Black Swan.
Yeah, and just moving more into positive serendipity or maximizing exposure to positive black swans. I think that's the one memory I got. So you're just always stepping into uncertain situations that have massive upside but little downside. As a little taste for the listeners for one of our episodes.
Something to come up in a couple of weeks.
Coming up in a few weeks for us.
Good teaser. The other one I'll throw at you is I'm interviewing a guy shortly for my podcast named Mark Manson. He wrote a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which I don't know if it's as big in Australia, but in Canada and the US. Yeah, so here it's millions and millions of copies, right? And so, of course, I'm reading his 3 most formative books in advance of the chat, and he gave me Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is 1,200-page fiction. David Foster Wallace is a virtuoso MacArthur kind of genius grant recipient, polymath, genius, all that stuff. He's sadly no longer living, as he sadly took his own life. And So I had to pull Infinite Jest off my shelf and revisit my bookmark, still lodged in it at like page 250 when I had given up, right? And so I was like, I remember the feeling of reading this book being both torturous and exquisite at the same time. David Foster Wallace exposes me to a breadth of emotional states that nothing else does in writing. So if you believe that most emotions cannot be defined in words, like there's much more nuanced emotions than like happy, sad, angry, joyful, but you can't quite put a finger on them, which is why the greeting card industry is worth billions of dollars. David Foster Wallace will help you articulate things you didn't even know you realized until you read it. And it is so torturous, exquisite at the same time.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. One we've read, one.
Do you need another book, or did I hit your?
Yeah, no. Give us another one then. Yeah, give us another one.
Okay, well, I could keep going. I'll go if you want me to. I'll go with. Okay, here's something that I don't know if many of your guests talk about, but I believe that the graphic novel category of books is still widely unappreciated, even though they're huge. And there's been some sort of mainstream ones like Ghost World, say by Dan Close, which became a movie, and maybe Mouse by Art Spiegelman, or right, that one, right? So I would just say in that category, I think there's a lot of people that are doing amazing work, and somebody who comes to mind is a guy by the name of Adrian Tomine. His last name is Tomine. I would love to get him on my podcast. His most recent graphic novel is called Killing and Dying. It came out in 2015. He does a lot of New Yorker covers, but like David Foster Wallace, his books get at stories. They're adult comic books. Like they're not I wouldn't let my kids read them because they're so mature. They get at feelings and relationships and situations that you're just like, oh. Like you'd read one of his stories and you'll lying prone on your couch for half an hour thinking about it. It's incredible stuff. Fantastic. And it's not what I don't like about graphic novels is the stuff that is really fantastical or alternate reality or sci-fi or space flying. This is like real. Like it's like your favorite dramatic Oscar-winning movie in a book. That's how his stuff reads.
Awesome. Well, Neil, thanks so much for sharing your ideas, sharing your book recommendations, talking about your podcast. The last question is just where can people find you and your work and stuff?
I mean, just email me. I mean, I know it's so funny to say that, but I just think that the world is so big and so beautiful. And if I was lucky enough to include you in this funny and weird and idiosyncratic conversation that we have had, and you resonated with it, then I already know that you're my favorite kind of person in the world. And so I genuinely mean it. My email address is Neil, Neil, at globalhappiness.org. So it's Neil at globalhappiness.org. People who make it to the end of podcasts are my favorite people in the world. That's a great way to talk. And obviously I'm on all the crap online, like, Twitter and all that stuff.
Fantastic. Neil, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much, not just for having me, but I love your podcast. I love what you do. I love your earnestness. I love your hardworkingness about it. I love your thoughtfulness. I love your thoughtful questions. I think what you're doing is really, really rare and really special and really unique. And I am just so happy to be connected with you guys. So thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thanks for listening. We really enjoyed that chat with Neil Pasricha. As Neil said, his favorite people are those that make it through to the end of the podcast. I think ours are as well. We love those people that make it through right to the end. If you made it to the end and you want to check out our top 50 books of all time, head to whatyouwilllearn.com/top50 and we'll send you that list. We made a version about 12 months ago at the end of 2017, and we're about to redo an updated 2019 edition, and I could say at least 20 new books will be on there that we've read this year that have slipped into our top 50 books. So if you want to be one of the first to get that new and updated edition, head to whatyouwilllearn.com/top50 and we'll send you our list for free.